June 6, 1997. ECW is presenting Wrestlepalooza out of the hollowed halls of the ECW Arena. The rabid ECW fanbase is witnessing a loser leaves town match between the enigmatic Raven and the heart and soul of ECW, Tommy Dreamer. This isn't just a feud that's been played out over the span of 2 years. This is a rivalry that has deep roots in childhood history. How did we get here? Yall is 1997. Frost up those tips, grab your puka shell necklace, and crack open a Zima as we roll this one back with a rewind. Welcome to the Feud Rewind. I'm your host, Benza Lance. One of the aspects that many fans remember about ECW from the mid and late 90s was that it was a bloody thunderdome of some of the most extreme feats of wrestling you've ever imagined. Granted, when you have a roster that includes the likes of Terry Funk, New Jack, Cactus Jack, and Sabu, you can probably rest assured that things will go sideways and get really interesting really quick. However, one of the main foundational pieces of why ECW worked was their long-term storytelling. Paul Heyman is the master at laying the building blocks down for outstanding drama to unfold, as we've covered in our Taz vs. Sabu episode. Of course, the greatest directors need cast members that can not only play a role, if you will, but can also bring their own version of humanity to said character to add the weight and depth that you need to gain emotional collateral. Perfectly for us, we were gifted with perhaps the best babyface of the 1990s, and one of the more unique heels that we've ever seen. Starting with our hero. Tommy Dreamer is the pride and joy of Yonkers, New York. Trained by the legendary Johnny Rodz, Dreamer debuted in 1989, with his early career saw him earning his stripes in promotions such as the IWCCW and the CWA. Dreamer would find a home in Extreme Championship Wrestling in 1993, initially starting off in front of the crowds as the pretty boy character, receiving palpable hate from those crowds. It would be an angle with the Sandman in 1994 that would see Dreamer ingratiate himself to the ECW faithful. There was a match booked between the two that had the stipulation of being a Singapore cane match. This was to capitalize on the infamous Michael Fay caning that occurred in Singapore. The result of the outcome of the match would be that the loser would receive 10 lashes with the Singapore cane. Dreamer would lose the match, and after receiving his initial 10 lashes, he would then ask the Sandman for another, causing the crowd to feel sympathy for him as he took the extra, and then another on top of that. The feud with the Sandman would include Dreamer accidentally blinding the Sandman with a cigarette to one eye and a Singapore cane to the other. Immediately after, Dreamer seemed to break kayfabe and started aiding the Sandman. He professed that he didn't mean to do it, and that it was an accident, as other wrestlers, both face and heel, swarmed out of the locker room to help. The feud continued with Sandman planning to announce his retirement at an ECW show, only to attack Dreamer and reveal he was never actually blind. The feud ended when Dreamer defeated the Sandman in a no DQ, no holds barred match. This match showcased a level of brutality that gave Dreamer a definitive sense of credibility. He had also given his look a bit of a change, swapping out his green suspenders over time to be adorned with more shooter-style trunks and boots during this era. Defeating the Sandman had cemented Dreamer as one of the, if not the top babyface at the time in ECW. What Tommy needed was a foil for his big, jacked, and handsome character. Someone who could only best Dreamer in the mind games, controlling the narrative through manipulation. Quoth the Raven, nevermore. Raven comes to us by way of Philadelphia. Receiving training at the Monster Factory under Larry Sharp, Raven would debut in 1988, making the rounds in Puerto Rico, Memphis, Vancouver, British Columbia, Portland, and Texas. Receiving an initial cup of coffee in WCW as the Floridian surfer Scotty Flamingo, Raven's pre-ECW run is perhaps most remembered for his time in the WWF as Johnny Polo. Polo was portrayed as the spoiled rich brat, and was most famous for managing the Quebecers to 3 tag team title reigns. Raven's run on the national stage ended in October of 1994. His WWF contract expiring, the writing was on the wall that a change was needed. The metamorphosis that the industry was going through at the time was felt far and wide. As we've covered before with feuds happening during this era, the times of the quote job gimmicks and the kitschy play on word names were starting to not entertain the crowds as they used to. The rise of crash-style TV with shows such as Jerry Springer showed us that some outlandishness added to your drama can be compelling storytelling. What Raven would undergo would be a complete reversal of character and physique that would transform the performer not only into the Raven that we would know, but it would help transform his opponent of his first major feud with his new promotion, ECW. The January 10th, 1995 episode of ECW's Hardcore TV saw Stevie Richards introducing the former Johnny Polo to ECW as Raven, who proclaimed himself as the leader of Generation X. Stevie Richards would prove not only to be Raven's underboss of sorts, but also a constant magnet for a lot of Raven's abuse. Raven had himself undergone a physical change, not only bulking up considerably to a build 236 on his 6'1" frame, but also embracing a grunge-based look with faded band shirts, flannel, and facial piercings replacing the yuppie character he was portraying previously. This night, Raven would help Richards defeat Hack Myers, and the stable The Raven's Nest was born. Another change that Raven undertook was employing a more psychologically based approach to revealing that he had a vendetta against Tommy Dreamer, who happened to be wrestling in Japan at the time. Raven would spend the first few weeks of his time in ECW cutting promos on Dreamer.
It's full of kings and queens. They'll blind your eyes and steal your dreams. Kurt Cobain didn't make it and left an entire generation of tortured souls behind. Tommy Dreamer, take heed. Quote the Raven, nevermore.
In one, Raven says that the world of kings and queens will steal your dreams. Kurt Cobain left behind tortured souls and suggests Tommy Dreamer be aware. In another, Raven is swinging on a swing set. Raven is looking at the empty swing and talks about broken promises and broken homes. He talks about raindrops tasting like tears. Tommy Dreamer will feel the pain of a certain youth. Finally, Raven is sitting in a classroom. He says that we spend our entire youth in a room like the one he is in right now. Childhood should be a world of bliss and knowledge, unless you are a misfit and an outcast, which makes it all a scare. Raven says you can try, but you can never forget the horrors of the classroom. Raven says this time Tommy Dreamer will not graduate the class. The chalkboard has, quote, "I hate Tommy Dreamer," written on it over a dozen times. The Raven's Nest would expand to include the Broad Street Bullies, and Dreamer would make his return to ECW from Japan on February 25th, 1995, to finally confront Raven, essentially telling him to either leave his name out of his mouth or put up his dukes. Raven replies that it's neither the time or the place. Being able to control the narrative of the very obviously emotionally charged Dreamer now no doubt was like adding gasoline to a house fire. Raven and Stevie Richards are now in the ring, goading Dreamer in. Tommy takes the bait, and this quickly leads to the rest of the Nest trying to pull Dreamer off of Raven, as Raven sits in the corner of the ring in non-combative defiance. Dreamer's blood was boiling, probably more so that the fella talking shit was not fighting back. Until he did. Raven explodes out of the corner at Dreamer, and the two have to constantly be pulled apart as the foray exits the ring to the ringside and then to the back. Later on, Dreamer would unleash a promo about his history with Shane Douglas, Cactus Jack, and Terry Funk. Dreamer has to deal with all of these men, but it doesn't mean at all that Dreamer has forgotten about Raven. Dreamer calls out Raven for being an opportunist, while Dreamer himself is the quintessential company man.
Raven, I've known you a long time. See, Raven, you started out your career as Scotty the Body. You had respect. And then you sold out. You became Scotty Flamingo. And then you sold your soul. You became Johnny Polo. See, Raven, I never sold out. Never forgot about my roots. I know I never would have been to Japan if it wasn't for ECW. I know I wouldn't be the man standing before you today if it wasn't for ECW. And I know I could wake up every single morning, look at myself in the mirror, and I got respect. That's because of ECW. You know what the best part about ECW is? You can't fool anybody here. You see right through you. So everybody knows you got the chance to sell out. You got the call, and the offer came through. The Raven would fly the coop. And everybody knows if I got the call and the offer came through, I would hang up. Raven, don't you ever get up in my face again. Nevermore, Raven.
Hey, this is Ben with Feud Rewind with a quick word from our first unofficial sponsor. Water. You need some. I need some. We all need some. We're made of it. Guess what? It comes in a bunch of different varieties. Hot, cold, frozen. You can get it flavored. You can get it plain. With bubbles, no bubbles, out of your tap, out of a bottle, out of a box. The possibilities are endless. Regardless, you need some. Before we get started, go get a glass. I'm going to get one too. We'll meet back here and start the show. Thank you so much. Water.
Physically, things would first come to a head at the Extreme Warfare Live event. Taking place on March 18th, 1995, the third bout on our card of the evening was a, quote, Generation X gauntlet match, pitting Tommy Dreamer against the Raven's Nest. Raven, Stevie Richards, and the Broad Street Bullies, Johnny Hotbody and Tony Stetson. The match saw the members of the Raven's Nest handcuffed at ringside, with Dreamer to face all four men in succession. Dreamer first faced Stetson, pinning him following a DDT. He then faced Hotbody, pinning him following yet another DDT. While Dreamer was distracted wrestling Richards, Dreamer's mentor Terry Funk comes to the ring and severs Raven's handcuffs using a bolt cutter. After Dreamer pins Richards following a enziguri, Tommy can't wait to get his hands on Raven. Raven is playing possum, however, allowing Dreamer to be lured in. Not realizing the crowd is attempting to alert Dreamer, Raven sucker punches Tommy using the broken handcuff, then hits a DDT on the ringside concrete, getting the 1-2-3 win for the Raven's Nest. Raven would keep attacking Dreamer after the bell with the shredded remains of the handcuff, busting Dreamer open. Raven would produce another pair of handcuffs and cuff Dreamer to the ring ropes in front of the fans along the outside of the ring. And stiff and emphatic chair shot to Dreamer puts a thunderous end to this bout. A post-match promo from Dreamer laments that Raven has proven himself to be hardcore, but Dreamer must show Raven why Tommy is extreme. It was during these first few months in this feud that we were able to piece together some of Raven and Dreamer's backstory. Growing up, they went to the same school. Dreamer was the good-looking jock, while Raven was the social misfit. Years of being cast aside as the outcast had left a pit of rage and revenge deep inside of Raven. Keeping that in your back pocket for a second, our next chapter in this story happens at the three-way dance. The April 8th, 1995 event is notable in the annals of ECW lore, as this was not only the event that saw Sabu no-show in favor of touring with New Japan. This show also saw the debuts of three notable talents for ECW. Firstly, Eddie Guerrero and Rick Steiner as far as wrestling talent is concerned. And secondly, well, we'll get to them in just a second. Prior to the opening bout, Stevie Richards informs the Broad Street Bullies that they would be fired from the Raven's Nest if they failed to defeat their opponents, who were then revealed to be the Pitbulls, the team comprising of Pitbull number 1 and Pitbull number 2. The Pitbulls went on to defeat the Broad Street Bullies by pinfall in a short squash after delivering a super bomb to Johnny Hotbody. As a result, the Broad Street Bullies were fired from the Nest and replaced by the Pitbulls, who declared Raven to be their master. Following the match, Richards reveals to Raven they had tracked down the girl from a story Raven had told Richards about. Raven makes a couple sideways remarks about the girl from his past who's overweight and with acne. Richards eats a backhand from Raven for bringing her to the show. However, Beulah McGillicuddy debuts this night at ringside alongside Stevie Richards in support of Raven, and what stands ringside is what is by all accounts a very beautiful woman. During the match, Richards attempts to kiss McGillicuddy. After she slaps him, he begins to choke her out. When Tommy Dreamer attempts to intervene, Beulah blinds him with hairspray, revealing that the altercation between her and Richards was a ruse to trick Tommy. Richard then gives Dreamer a Stevie kick, and Raven gives Dreamer the even flow DVT for a pinfall victory. Dreamer is overly emotional and obviously playing a game with a faction that knows how to easily manipulate him. At Hostile City Showdown the following week, Beulah's backstory is revealed further. While Raven and Dreamer, allegedly former childhood friends, had been attending a summer camp in their teens, they had met Beulah, who was overweight and riddled with acne at the time. Beulah had fallen in love with Tommy Dreamer, but he had rejected her, so she slept with Raven to get back at him. Raven's lackey Stevie Richards brought Beulah, who is now a penthouse model, to ECW so she can gain revenge on Dreamer by helping Raven. This is a perfect illustration on how the story is very atypical from what we see. Raven is the bullied kid, the social outcast, the, at least, quote, on paper underdog that we should be reveling at the chance of him getting back at his childhood bully Tommy Dreamer. In fact, there are a few factors in here, such as Dreamer rejecting Beulah in their youth due to her weight and acne, that today would be viewed maybe as a little beyond the pale, and would land Dreamer firmly in the heel category. I would suggest that it was the fact that it was in ECW that we could go with such unconventional tropes as these that helped further this specific narrative. Anyway, getting back to Hostile City Showdown, the fourth bout on our April 15th, 1995 show saw things escalate almost immediately as Raven plunges on top of Dreamer to start the match. They brawl back into a room where Dreamer comes out bleeding. They brawl over to the Eagles Area's Nest of the ECW Arena, where Dreamer backdrops out of a pile driver and gives Raven a suplex. Dreamer finds a literal kitchen sink and beats Raven over the head with it. Someone hands Dreamer a big plastic dinosaur, and Raven takes one to Yambag City with it. Back inside the ring,
Dreamer covers Raven. 1, 2, and oh, come on! Richards interfering. Dreamer had Raven beat. Where's the disqualification? DDT on Richards. The referee allowed that. DDT on referee John Finnegan. Dreamer called his own disqualification. Oh boy. Did Beulah McGillicuddy just make the biggest mistake of her life? Tommy Dreamer! Gunpile from Beulah McGillicuddy!
Stevie Richards runs over and breaks up the pin. He takes a DDT for his troubles. Dreamer at this point is so overcome with rage and emotion that trying to get revenge on Raven, that he gives a DDT to the ref, which causes him to be disqualified, giving Raven the victory on paper. However, since this was the mid-90s and Dreamer needed to really get himself over with an ECW faithful that once saw him as a pretty boy. We needed an overwhelmingly positive, emotional win for Dreamer this night. At this point in the bout, Beulah sees a chance to get even with this guy and hops into the ring. Dreamer is so engulfed with emotions that he grabs Beulah and sets her up for a pile driver, doing the Sandman 4 corners, rotating and stopping at each ring post so everyone in the tents can get a good look, and drives Beulah into the mat. Dreamer has one of his classic celebrations with the fans as they chant EC-Dub. An emotional reprieve, though it's just a glimpse at things to come. A few weeks later, the May 16th, 1995 edition of ECW Hardcore TV is going to bring us another match for Dreamer to attempt to get the better of Raven. This is booked as a death match, and these two get bloody really quick. Everything from baking sheets, eggs, actual eggs, frying pans, and even a cheese grater to Raven's nether region near the end of the match. Yikes. A stipulation like this tends to have things fall apart very quickly, and various suplexes and pile drivers outside the ring and through tables ends with Raven hitting a power slam on a chair for the 1-2-3 victory. Dreamer gives literally everyone in the Raven's Nest DDTs after this match, but the number games prove just to be too much, and Raven and Stevie Richards proceed to lay the boots down on the face of ECW.
Tommy Dreamer now firing back on Richards and Raven. It's 2-on-1. But Dreamer, wait, that's Luna. That's Luna Vachon. Luna's in there. She's beating the snot out of Steve Richards. Breaking the back of Richards. That's Luna Vachon. Luna Vachon is here. What is Luna doing here?
It is at this moment that Luna Vachon enters the ring, helping clean house and then surprisingly signing herself with Tommy Dreamer. A backstage promo afterwards gives us some insight.
Hey there, this is Benzo with Feud Rewind, coming at you with a quick word from our second unofficial sponsor, the sun. That's right, summertime is here, and the living, if your living is like mine, is extremely difficult. But what's not difficult is popping in your earbuds, putting on those headphones, using a little Bluetooth speaker, and going out into the sun while you listen to this podcast. You and me, let's go get some vitamin D while we enjoy the sun. Thank you, sun. Now back to the show.
And yet another chapter in the ongoing saga known as Dreamer and Raven continues. See, the flesh is weak, but the mind is strong. Raven, you've always been weak. I've seen fear in your eyes. I know now I can never escape our past, but now I have someone out of your past. She laid with the lepers, climbed the highest mountain of Tibet, and spoke to the man with the third eye, and was strapped to the tree of woe for 30 days. But most of all, she's always been hardcore.
Luna was introduced as someone out of Raven's past, and Vachon herself states that she is the woman who has stood in the shadow of many men. She's going to now stand next to her man. Luna says her rage will be taken out on Ravens and Richards. It would be the following week's Hardcore TV episode that would air footage from the Enter the Sandman event, wherein we had a match pitting Raven and Richards against Tommy Dreamer and Mikey Whipwreck, ECW's lovable underdog who had beaten Richards at the Hostile City Showdown. Prior to the match, Shane Douglas, who also had a feud with Dreamer going on simultaneously, introduced us all to Bill Fonzie Alfonso, who was a, quote, troubleshooting referee who would bring order to the ECW. Y'all will remember Fonzie from our Taz vs. Sabu episode. This tag match is a fun one. Throughout the match, Fonzie does little things to, quote, enforce the rules. such as forcing Dreamer to bring the action back inside the ring under the threat of disqualification and waiting for Richards to return to his corner before starting a pinning count. Towards the end of the match, Dreamer and Raven deliver stereo DDTs on the concrete on their separate opponents. With both rolling back into the ring, we finally have Dreamer versus Raven one-on-one. Dreamer punches Raven out of the ring until Alfonso DQs Dreamer for using a closed fist on his opponent, establishing Fonzie as a figure who would draw the ire of the ECW audience by rigidly enforcing rules of professional wrestling that were otherwise largely overlooked. Dreamer is once again denied his retribution against Raven. Afterwards, while other refs hold back Dreamer from Alfonso, Shane Douglas jumps back in the ring to stir the pot and dare Dreamer to punch Alfonso. Cactus Jack also comes down to be the voice of reason. He tells Douglas that nobody wants him around anymore. Shane is on his way out soon back to the WWF anyway. They share some words to get a little intrigue building because the winner of Sandman vs. Cactus meets Shane Douglas later on in the show for the ECW title. Moving on with Raven and Dreamer, the event Barbed Wires, Hoodies, and Chokeslams takes place June 17th, 1995. There's going to be a lot of moving in pieces on this one, and bear with me a little bit. In the third match on the show, we see the debuting Vampire Warrior defeat Hackmeyers by pinfall with a lifting DDT. We know Vampire Warrior as Gangrel. Immediately following the third match, a brawl erupts between Vampire Warrior and Tommy Dreamer, with Vampire Warrior angry that his wife, Luna Vachon, was acting as Dreamer's valet. Dreamer would win a very violent and very bloody bout after DDTing Vampire Warrior onto a steel chair. Later on in the card, we actually have Beulah and Luna facing off against each other as well. After the bell sounds, Stevie Richards comes up from behind and decks Luna with a chair to give Beulah the easy pinfall in a matter of seconds. With the match over, Raven would give Luna a DDT and continues the beatdown, which brings out Tommy Dreamer. Dreamer is already in bad shape after his match with Gangrel, so he's no match for a fresh Raven. After a DDT, it looks like Raven even breaks some of Tommy's fingers. Raven is still not done. He handcuffs Luna crucifixion style to the middle rope, and as he goes to whack her with the chair, he notices that Dreamer is sliding in front to act as Operation Human Shield. So Raven connects anyway. Just a few weeks later, on June 30th, 1995, Mountaintop Madness takes place at the Flagstaff in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. The fifth bout saw ECW World Tag Team Champions, the Public Enemy, defend their titles against Raven and Stevie Richards. Raven and Richards defeat the Public Enemy to win the titles when Richards pinned Rocco Rock after the Gangsters interfered, hitting Rock with a pipe and dragging an unconscious Richards on top of Rock. An attempt by a referee to reverse the decision due to the interference was overturned by Bill Alfonso. Following the match, Richards issued an open challenge, prompting 911 to come to the ring and chokeslam Raven and Richards. Alfonso would confront 911 and receive a chokeslam as well. The main event saw ECW World Heavyweight Champion, the Sandman, defend his title against Tommy Dreamer. Before the match, Raven and Stevie Richards attacked Dreamer as he was approaching the ring, injuring his hand. The Sandman would win this bout after his manager, Woman, distracts Dreamer, enabling the Sandman to strike him in his injured hand with a Singapore cane, and then pin Dreamer using a small cat package to retain his title. Dreamer was fighting feuds on multiple fronts at this point. Dreamer vs. Sandman, and also Raven vs. Sandman, are iconic rivalries themselves that we'll be covering at some point on this podcast. Now, Mountaintop Madness takes place the night before Hardcore Heaven, an event that saw ECW Tag Team Champions Raven and Richards having to defend against Tommy Dreamer and Luna Vachon. You heard that right. The fifth match on the card saw non-stop hardcore shenanigans ensue. Near the end of the match, Vachon nailed a superplex on Richards, and then Beulah McGillicuddy threw powder in Vachon's face, allowing Richards to pin her to retain the titles. After the match, the Pitbulls come down and Raven orders them to superbomb Vachon, to which the Pitbulls refuse, and then Raven and Richards humiliate them by shoving apple pie in their face and hitting them with chairs, and the Pitbulls retaliate in kind, turning faces in the process. The Pitbulls attempt a superbomb on Richards until the Dudley brothers make the save. These wouldn't be the Dudley boys that we would come to know and love. These are the first iteration of the Dudleys and not Bully Ray or Devon at this point. Different guys. After the brawl, the Pitbulls and Dreamer clear the ring of the Raven's Nest. And what would be a hallmark of the feud, Raven would always get the on-paper victories, while Dreamer would remain the emotional lightning rod for this fanbase. The 1995 edition of Heatwave is a notable canonical moment. The July 15th, 1995 event, taking place at the ECW Arena, features a steel cage match on the card between Stevie Richards and Luna Vachon. Both competitors are a bloody mess very quickly in this, and chaos ensues. Most members of the Raven's Nest and Team Dreamer get involved, but Tommy ensures that it's just he and Raven at the end, which leads to Raven being handcuffed to the cage and walloped with a chair shot. This is what ECW fans nostalgically refer to as the chair shot heard around the world, as Tommy Dreamer finally gets a measure of revenge on his mortal enemy. The rest of the calendar year 1995 saw our titular characters involved in plenty of 6- and 8-person tag matches, and would even involve friend and tag partner of Tommy Dreamer, Cactus Jack, turning on the face of ECW as Cactus and Raven share similar pains as tortured souls. Cactus would cement his heel turn by leaving Team Dreamer hanging high and dry at Wrestlepalooza in 1995. The ramifications of which we'll get to in a minute, as instead we'll, at this point, focus on Gangsta's Paradise as our next notable event. The September 16th, 1995 event saw our 5th bout of the event being a tag team dog collar match for the ECW World Tag Team Championships between the defending champs Raven and Stevie Richards and the challengers the Pitbulls, with the stipulation being that the Pitbulls would be forced to disband if they lost. The match begins with Raven coming to the ring alone, after which his valet Beulah claims that Stevie Richards was unable to compete due to a broken arm sustained the prior night, and requesting that the match be changed to 2 out of 3 falls. Pitbull number 1 returns to the backstage area and emerges dragging Richards with him, revealing that his arm was not broken at all. Meanwhile, Raven scored a pinfall on Pitbull number 2 after pile driving him through a table. Several minutes later, Pitbull number 2 evened the count by pinning Richards after the Pitbulls superbombed him through the table. The Dudley brothers then interfered in the match, helping Raven and Richards superbomb both of the Pitbulls. The Pitbulls no-sold the superbombs, immediately rallying back and superbombing the Dudley brothers, removing them from the play. Shortly afterwards, Raven drugged Pitbull number 2 by holding an ether-soaked rag over his face, then driving him through a table at ringside with a driving elbow drop, causing him to be helped backstage and leaving Pitbull number 1 2-on-1, flying solo. Tommy Dreamer would then enter the ring and take Pitbull number 2's place, quickly DDTing Raven and pinning him, apparently winning the titles. As Dreamer and Pitbull number 1 celebrated, troubleshooting referee Bill Alfonso, who in the weeks prior to the event had repeatedly aided Raven by stridently enforcing minor rule infractions by Dreamer, comes down to the ring, accompanied by Big Dick Dudley, and overturns the decision, striking Dreamer's victory over Raven from the record and awarding the match to Raven and Richards. This would lead ECW Commissioner Todd Gordon to enter the ring and argue with Alfonso, who attacks Gordon, resulting in Dreamer coming to his defense. Big Dick Dudley would then give Dreamer a choke slam, a move that had previously been banned by Alfonso. After Alfonso announces that he was lifting the ban on the choke slam for one night only, 911, a wrestler whose signature move was the chokeslam, entered the ring and chokeslammed Fonzie. Pitbull number 2 would then return to the ring, with the Pitbulls executing a super bomb on both Raven and Richards simultaneously with the assistance of Dreamer and Allen 1, then pinning both to win the third and final fall of the match, becoming the new ECW World Tag Team Champions. Going into the fall, Tommy would have to wrap up a few loose ends by enlisting the help of none other of his mentor, Terry Funk, to take on Raven and Cactus Jack. The 1995 November to Remember event's main event was a tag match featuring Dreaming Funk versus Raven and Jack. Yep, just came up with those tag team names myself right now. Super tight. Raven and Cactus would prevent Dreamer and Funk from entering the ring to start. Finally, they do manage to enter, and both teams ended up brawling with each other using various weapons against one another and brawling throughout to the floor. Funk would knock out the referee with a dustpan, and both teams continued the fight, which turned out to be very, very brutal and very, very vicious. Cactus eventually hit a double-arm DDT to Funk on a chair, and Raven knocked out Dreamer with a springboard senton outside the ring. Bill Alfonso and Taz interfere in the match by attacking Funk, but Dreamer prevents them from attacking him, allowing Raven to attack him from behind. Taz and Alfonso left, while Dreamer drives Raven with 2 DDTs, and Funk hits a pile driver to Raven on a steel chair to win the match. However, both teams continue to brawl with each other after this match. A fantastic show, and while Dreamer is on the winning side, it's not quite the same as winning 1 versus 1. Fortunately for Dreamer, he wouldn't have to wait long to get his hands on Raven, with a tasty stipulation added to the top of it. Although this cherry would come with a lot of sour drizzle, as during the build-up to the match, Raven would further expound on his grudge against Dreamer, accusing Dreamer of not being there during Raven's parents' divorce, an accusation that Dreamer hotly denied. At Holiday Hell 1995, not only was this the first supercard that ECW was hosting in New York City, this one was taking place at the Lost Battalion Hall in Queens on December 29th, but we would see Tommy Dreamer facing off against Raven in a number 1 contenders match to determine who will face ECW champion Sandman later on in the evening. The match itself gets started only after Dreamer has to deal with Stevie Richards and the debuting Blue Meanie, who are feigning that Raven's leg is injured. And after numerous DDTs, a cheese grater to the face, and one final DDT on a chair, Raven's hand is held up as the victor, as Dreamer lays in a pool of his own blood. Raven would try using these same shenanigans later on in the evening against the Sandman, but our beer-drinking, chain-smoking champion is just too much for the Next to overcome this night. The year 1995 might have ended on a bittersweet note for Tommy Dreamer, but 1996 would see our feud continuing with interesting results. On the ECW House Party show, airing January 5th, 1996, we have a segment with Joey Styles interviewing Dancing Stevie Richards, the Blue Meanie, and Beulah. Stevie states that he's no longer dancing, but now Studley Stevie Richards and the King of Swing Stevie Richards, after he had been kissed by Missy Hyatt just weeks before. Stevie talks a little bit more and tries to hit on Beulah. Beulah pushes Stevie away again, and Richards asks her why.
No! Stop it!
Oh, what's the matter? Oh, is it because you're Raven's girlfriend?
No! I'm pregnant!
You're what? You're pregnant? What are you, stupid? The pills say 1 day at a time, moron. What are you, an idiot?
What do you care? It's not yours! No! Stop it! Stop it! It's not his either! It's Tommy's.
She states the reason is because she's pregnant. This brings Raven back out. Raven calls Beulah an idiot for getting pregnant, to which Beulah replies, "What do you care? It's not yours." Raven quickly looks at Stevie and starts to attack him until Beulah tells him that it's not Richards's either. It's Tommy Dreamer's. Raven flips out and goes after Beulah, only to be saved by Tommy. Beulah lays out Stevie in the meanie with a baking sheet while Tommy Dreamer nails Raven with a cardboard sign. But not any sign, it's a stop sign wrapped in cardboard. Dreamer then pile drives Raven on top of a blueberry pie, and the new couple goes off to celebrate their newly announced pregnancy. It is here that the really big first half of our feud is over. Dreamer still hasn't received that one-on-one victory versus Raven yet, but Tommy is still walking around having won the girl, I guess, if you want to use old school tropes like that. Incidentally, Raven would win the ECW World title from the Sandman later on this month of January. Raven would successfully defend this champion against the likes of Chris Jericho, Too Cold Scorpio, and Shane Douglas, just to name a few. But it would be Raven's rivalry against the Sandman that would be Raven's main focus for most of the rest of 1996. Raven would embark on a pathway of psychological warfare against the Sandman, going as far as to brainwash Sandman's own wife and child against him, having them join the Raven's Nest. Dreamer, for his journey, would run smack dab into the chest of the 6'7" mountain that was Brian Lee, a hired gun from Raven that had been enlisted to eliminate Tommy Dreamer. While Dreamer was still chasing Raven and the ECW title, Lee was placed in front of Dreamer to run interference while Raven dealt with the Sandman. Throughout the summer and the fall, Lee would absolutely waste Tommy Dreamer. At the ECW event Fight the Power in June 1, during a 6-man tag, Brian Lee chokeslammed Dreamer from the ECW balcony through 3 stacked tables, then pinned Tommy for the win. The footage was frequently used during the ECW opening video montage. On June 22nd, at Hardcore Heaven, after losing a singles match to Dreamer after Dreamer's valet Beulah gets involved, Lee again chokeslammed Dreamer off a balcony through 3 tables. At Heatwave, during a 3-on-3 Rage in the Cage tag team cage match, Lee would again chokeslam Dreamer, this time from the top of the cage through 3 tables set up on the outside by Raven's henchmen. On October 5th at Ultimate Jeopardy, during a tag match also involving Sandman and Stevie Richards, Lee once again chokeslammed Dreamer from the ECW balcony, this time through 4 tables set below. At several house shows released on ECW FanCam, Lee and Dreamer had Fall Count Anywhere matches, which resulted in the 2 men brawling into moving traffic outside the building. However, the most memorable moment of the Brian Lee and Tommy Dreamer mini feud, and maybe the most infamous moment of the Raven and Sandman rivalry, takes place in the same supercard. High Incident takes place on October 26, 1996. The 6th match saw the Sandman defend his ECW World Heavyweight Championship against his ally Too Cold Scorpio. The Sandman pinned Scorpio to retain the title after Scorpio missed a somersault leg drop. Following the match, the Raven's Nest, which would include Sandman's estranged wife at this time, attacked and crucified the Sandman, tying him to a wooden cross and putting a crown made out of barbed wire on his head. The event was heavily criticized. Raven was forced to make an out-of-character apology to the audience, and the footage never aired on ECW television. Kurt Angle, who had been considering wrestling for ECW in the future, left the ECW arena in disgust due to this incident. However, the main event of this card was a scaffold match between Tommy Dreamer and Brian Lee. The match marked the culmination of the feud between Dreamer and Lee, and would see the men fight atop the scaffold above the ring, with the winner being the first man to knock the other man off the scaffold.
Tommy firing back. Oh, Tommy's firing back. Tommy goes downstairs. And that scaffolding could give at any moment. And Tommy giving it everything he's got. Oh my God!
Dreamer wins the bout by knocking Lee off the scaffold and through a stack of table in the ring with a flurry of punches. All throughout 1996, however, the chemistry within the Raven's Nest was starting to deteriorate, especially the relationship between Raven and his often maligned sidekick, Stevie Richards. The months of physical, mental, and psychological abuse at the hand of Raven have noticeably been taking their toll on Richards, and a few notable moments happen. At Ultimate Jeopardy on October 5th, 1996, Raven was scheduled to team with Brian Lee against Dreamer and the Sandman in a match, with Raven's ECW World Heavyweight Championship on the line. After Raven was announced as being unable to compete, Richards substituted for him, with Raven losing his title after the Sandman pinned Richards. Upon his return, Raven blamed Richards for the loss. At Holiday Hell on December 7th, 1996, Raven defeats the Sandman in a barbed wire match to regain the World Championship. Despite this, the tension between Ravens and Richards continues to build until, on December 8th, 1996, Richards turns on Raven by superkicking him during a match with the Sandman. Richards, the Blue Meanie, and Supernova subsequently would break away from the Raven's Nest. Going into 1997, Raven was still our champion, and Dreamer has still yet to pin him in a singles bout. However, seeing the frayed edges of the sweater of the Raven's Nest starting to unravel, Dreamer employs some of Raven's own mind games against him. This is also starting to line up with ECW exploding onto a more national stage with their move to bigger venues and their first pay-per-view Barely Legal coming up in April. Along the way, former Nest member Stevie Richards would also receive a shot at Raven's ECW title, although Raven would retain. In fact, our next main canonical event is going to be Barely Legal. We've covered ECW's first pay-per-view in a little depth in our Taz vs. Habu episode, but this card features two matches that play big into our feud. The penultimate match was a three-way dance between Stevie Richards, the Sandman, and Terry Funk. The winner would receive an immediate championship match against ECW World Heavyweight Champion Raven. The match begins with multiple short-lived alliances between the competitors until Sandman received a ladder to attack Richards and Terry Funk. Later in the match, Funk gains control for a short time when he performs an airplane spin with the ladder, knocking down both of his opponents. The match continues with the 3 minutes exchanging attacks in and outside of the ring, using weapons including a steel chair and a garbage can with steel metal. Richards is eliminated from the match when both Funk and Sandman pin him following a powerbomb. Sandman then introduces a string of barbed wire to the match. After Funk snatches this and whips Sandman's exposed back with it, Sandman regains possession of the barbed wire and wraps himself in it. Richards then re-enters the ring and superkicks Sandman, which allows Funk to perform a moonsault from the top rope and pin Sandman to win the match. Following this match to determine his contender, Raven immediately enters the ring as the bell rings to begin the ECW World Heavyweight Championship match. Raven dominates the majority of the match with the aid of chairs and table, while an ECW ringside doctor continuously checks Funk's condition due to his excessive bleeding from the head. Members of Raven's Nest eventually appeared to assist Raven, which prompted Tommy Dreamer, who was providing against commentary for this match, to enter the ring. Dreamer performs a DDT on Raven, which allows Funk to pin Raven and become the ECW World Heavyweight Champion. Once again, Dreamer is not the winner on paper, but the emotional win for Dreamer, and also for his idol and hero Terry Funk, light up the ECW Arena, as the defeated Raven sulks away. Dreamer would continue to cost Raven opportunities to regain that ECW title. At Chapter 2 on May 10th, 1997, which saw Raven in a four-way dance that also featured Sandman and Stevie Richards challenging Terry Funk. At the Buffalo Invasion on May 17th, 1997, we actually have 3 matches of note that are germane to our story. The 5th bout, which was a Dream Partners tag team match, with Raven picking his former henchman Stevie Richards as his dream partner, and Tommy Dreamer picking Terry Funk as his. Raven and Richards, whose relationship had deteriorated in the months leading up to this event, argued and bickered with each other throughout this match. Towards the end of this match, a pin attempt on Raven by Dreamer was thwarted by interference from Louis Spicoli, resulting in Dreamer fighting Raven to backstage. As Spicoli attempted to give Funk a Death Valley driver, Richards gives him a Stevie kick, knocking both men down and enabling Richards to pin Funk. The penultimate bout was a single match between Spicoli and Tommy Dreamer. Before the match, Spicoli boasted that Dreamer would be unable to compete due to his interference in the earlier match, only for Dreamer to show up and start walking down to the ring. During the match, the two men would fight into the bleachers, resulting in Dreamer rolling down them. Towards the end of the match, Spicoli pulled Tommy Dreamer's valet Beulah in front of him to block a chair shot for Dreamer, only for McGillicuddy to give him the low blow, donkey kick style, enabling Dreamer to give Spicoli a DDT and then pin him. The main event of the Buffalo Invasion saw ECW World Heavyweight Champion Terry Funk defend his title against Raven, the Sandman, and Stevie Richards in a four-way dance and a sort of rematch from Chapter 2. During this match, Raven DDT'd both Funk and the Sandman and then demanded that Richards pin him and lays down for Stevie. Richards refuses, instead super kicking Raven and enabling Funk to pin Raven as the first man eliminated. Richards went on to eliminate the Sandman with another Stevie kick. Terry Funk would then throw a guardrail at Richards, knocking him down and enabling him to pin him and retain. Following all of this, on the May 29th episode of Hardcore TV, it is announced that Dreamer and Raven will finally face off one-on-one in a loser leaves town match. The loser of this match will have their respective tenureship ended in ECW, and this is going to take place at Wrestlepalooza in 1997. June 6, 1997. A sold-out ECW arena filled to the gills with the ECW faithful that has seen this 2+ year-long feud between childhood friends and rivals unfold before our eyes is waiting very impatiently for the 5th match on this card. Throughout all of this, Raven has skirted being face-to-face with Dreamer, and the times that he has also gotten the upper hand. Raven tries to leave, but Dreamer decks his sidekick and stops Raven from leaving the arena. Dreamer sends Raven headfirst into a steel door. Dreamer uses a chair on Raven as they continue to compete into the crowd. Dreamer spits a drink into Raven's face, but then gets hip-tossed off the bleacher, and Tommy goes crashing through a table. Raven hits a pile driver on the concrete after a table is flipped over, causing Dreamer to bust wide open. They head over to the Eagle's Nest, and Raven slams the table onto Dreamer before standing the table up. Dreamer is then set through the table, and as Raven is attempting to set up another to pile drive Tommy through it, Tommy counters with a backdrop. Tommy would then miss with a big splash and crashes through the table himself anyway. Raven sends Dreamer into the guard railing, but Tommy returns the favor. Dreamer crotches Raven over the railing and clone slides his rival off. Dreamer again sends Raven into the railing and follows this up with a facebuster on the floor. Tommy nails Raven on the head with the steel chair as they continue the brawl in the crowd. They're both busted wide open at this point. Raven tosses Dreamer off the Eagle's Nest and onto the vending machine before dropping down to the floor. They finally get back into the ring where Raven drop toe holds Dreamer into a steel chair. Raven puts Tommy onto the top turnbuckle, but gets pushed off by Dreamer. Raven tosses Dreamer off the top and Tommy lands on a chair, which gets Raven a near fall. Dreamer counters this with a hip toss and a DDT. Tommy attempts to grab a fan sign, but the sign hits the referee. Dreamer hits referee with the fan, which has a street sign. Tommy plants Raven with a pile driver onto the street sign for a near fall. At this point, there's multiple run-ins by Lufus and Louis Spicolli. Ultimately, what Tommy's going to have to hit is a whole fuckload of DDTs, and finally a Death Valley driver, followed with a DDT on a street sign to finally pin Raven and get that 1-2-3 victory.
Tommy's got Raven up! Death Valley driver! He just nailed Raven with Louis Spicolli's finisher, and Spicoli had to watch it! Dreamer's sending a message to Raven. It's going to take more than Raven. It's going to take more than Spicoli to end Dreamer's dream. Tonight is Tommy Dreamer's night. His dream has come true. It's the greatest night of his life. Tommy Dreamer has beaten Raven.
Dreamer is finally able to conquer his childhood demons of being that pretty boy jock bully, and has to go through hell to make himself the type of man that the ECW faithful could rally behind. Now, unfortunately for Dreamer, the adulation wouldn't last very long this night, as the lights would go out after the 3 count. When they would come back on, Rob Van Dam is in the ring and kicks a chair in Dreamer's face. Dreamer low blows Rob, and then the lights go out again. This time, the lights come back on as Sabu's in the ring, and hits Dreamer in the face with the chair again. They do the lights off and lights on gimmick again, and now Jerry Lawler's in the ring. Chaos unfolds, and all of these 3 guys, plus Raven, end up beating down Tommy. As it turns out, even at the end of the day, Raven still has one trick up his sleeve. Tommy Dreamer and Raven provided us in ECW the groundwork for a legendary feud. The personal history was deep-rooted, while also providing mystique and intrigue throughout the program. The depth of emotional collateral these men were able to get us to invest in this feud was beautiful in its execution. Dreamer was fighting to prove himself and to defend the honor of ECW, while Raven sought to break Dreamer's spirit to prove his own superiority. A storyline layered with personal childhood issues, betrayals, and deep-seated animosity. The feud helped establish both men as top stars in ECW and solidified their legacies in the wrestling industry. This feud is still lovingly remembered to this day, almost 30 years after it started, as both a paramount of long-term storytelling and also as a pillar for the hardcore legacy that is ECW. To both Tommy Dreamer and Raven, I extend my deepest of gratitudes to both of you. Thank you so much for the memories. And with that brings us to the end of the rewind for the week. I appreciate you for spending some time with me to relive some classic wrestling drama. You know, to do that, follow, like, subscribe, and share gimmicks. We're on the socials as Feud Rewind, and that email is feudrewind@gmail.com. Fellow fan, I am your host, Ben Zalance, and I'll see you next week when we roll it back with another feud to rewind.